Welcome to MMA Below the Surface, where we dig deeper on upcoming UFC cards and combat sports events. I'm your host, Maveen Ahluwalia, and today we're breaking down the main card of UFC 270, Francis Ngannou versus Ciryl Gane. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first fight on the main card is Saeed Nurmagomedov versus Cody Stamann. Saeed, not at all related to Khabib, even though the same last name. 3-1 in the UFC is the favorite going into this fight. Some of his strengths, so amazing spinning attacks, spinning back kicks, spinning wheel kicks to the head, back fists as well. Not as many with the elbows, definitely favors the spinning back fist over the elbow, but you see him use them in all sorts of scenarios. He likes to use that spinning back kick to the body when his opponents are coming straight at him. When he's in the pocket boxing, he'll use that spinning back fist. Even when he's evading along the fence line, you see him use that as well. So it's something he goes to quite often, and he's very polished at. Some other is his strengths. Fast hands, great jab, great solid fundamental jab. Uses it to keep people at range and really set up those kicks, because that's his A game. The kicks are really his A game in this one. Some of his weaknesses coming into this fight. So sometimes spins a little too much. We saw in one of his losses in the UFC against Raoni Barcelos that he wasn't able to land the spinning attacks, and he started just forcing it a little bit and just going to the well with it way too much, I thought at least. And it actually left him open for takedowns. On a few occasions, Barcelos was able to move to the side when he threw that spinning kick, because he'd just been throwing it so often, and just catch the leg and take him right down. And I think honestly, it's one of the reasons he lost that fight. I think technically he was the better kickboxer, but just got a little repetitive and kind of showed his card too much, and it left him open for the takedowns, especially with those spinning attacks. You have to commit your full body to them. And so for that reason, it leaves you open to the takedowns when your opponent can time you on them, especially the spinning back fist as well. If your opponent can just duck under that, the double leg is there just all day long. And often they can end up taking your back with it too. So I think it's something to look out for in this fight. Dude's got great cardio though. Has slowed down a little bit, but hasn't shown any major signs of fatigue. I would say the real weakness is just in that repetitive striking that he can sometimes get into and getting taken down a little too much, but otherwise has shown a solid scrambling ability and really just an amazing kicking game. Finished a few of his fights via spinning back kick, and finished Ricardo Ramos with a spinning back kick to the body, who is just an absolute monster in this division. So his opponent, Cody Stamann, 5-4 in the UFC. Definitely a lot more ups and downs than Saeed, but what are some of Cody's strengths? Great wrestler, mixes up the striking and grappling pretty well. He's very well-rounded. I wouldn't say he's absolutely dominant in one of those categories. He's got solid stand-up and very solid wrestling game as well. He also is very tough, great chin. He's shown that in a few of his fights, but has a hard time when he can't land the takedown in his fights. I think that's something he's shown over the course of his career. If he can't land the takedown consistently and get some control time, he normally has a harder time winning these fights, but is a very, very strong wrestler. I mean, he went head-to-head with Merab Dvalishvili, who is just a monster in the featherweight division, and I think he's been making a name for himself even more so after his fight with Cody. But they went back and forth with the wrestling, and Cody was actually able to take Merab down a number of times, but it was just the cardio of Merab that really just overwhelmed him, as he does with many people. But I think that is one thing with Cody. He can gas out just chasing the takedown sometimes. So it's something to keep in mind for this fight. I mentioned he has good striking. He has good fundamental striking. Nothing flashy like Saeed does, but the only The only weakness I would say with his striking is he pot shots a little bit, doesn't really put together combos, and he has powerful hands, but as the fight goes on, he normally starts to fall behind in the striking just because he's not very active with it, and if he does, it's only 1-2 shots maximum at a time. Now, in terms of how these guys match up together, so I think Saeed definitely has the better striking. He's actually, like I mentioned, he's the favorite going into this fight, and I think that is a fair assessment by the odds makers. But I think Cody definitely has the advantage in the wrestling. He's going to be the bigger, stronger individual, and with him being able to take Merab down as he did, I am assuming he is going to be able to take Saeed down as well, because Saeed has been taken down by lesser wrestlers than Merab Dvalishvili, who's an absolute monster. So I think in this fight, they kind of play into each other's styles a bit. I think Cody's striking is he doesn't cut a ton of angles. He's very fundamental in his striking, and as I mentioned, he doesn't throw in large volume to overwhelm someone, and he doesn't cut angles when he's coming in as well. He normally attacks in a straight line. So I think that striking style plays very well into Saeed's game because of those powerful spinning attacks, and especially that spinning back kick to the body, I think is one of his most dangerous weapons. That striking style of Cody is going to leave him open to those attacks. But I also think on the opposite end, those same type of attacks leave him open to Cody's wrestling. And so it's an interesting kind of balance. Saeed's going to have to play, they're both going to have to play here in this fight. But I think Cody's a pretty sizable underdog, almost a plus 200. And I think if you see him able to stay away from the spinning attacks in the first round and kind of evade those, I think if he can start to capitalize on some of those misses, Cody can really start to take over the fight here. And I think it's something to look out for, especially in that first round. But if you see Saeed start to kind of find his range and timing those attacks, especially when Cody's coming in, that's when Saeed really shines. It's going to be a bad night for Cody. He's really going to have to rely on his wrestling, and when he can't get the striking going at all and he's just grinding against the fence, he usually starts to gas out in the later rounds, and I think Saeed will be able to take over. But if you watch in that first round, I like to do a lot of in-play betting. So if you see that first round and Cody staying away from those spinning attacks, I think he'd be a good underdog pick mid-fight. But yeah, so that's the first fight on the card. Next fight on the card is Michel Pereira versus Andre Fialho. So welterweight bout. Not too much to say in this for this fight. It's a late replacement. Andre is filling in for Muslim Salikov, who was supposed to be on the previous fight night with Calvin Kattar and Giga Chikadze. So it was originally supposed to be Michel Pereira versus Muslim Salikov, which I did a breakdown on that fight before I got canceled, but that would have been an absolutely fireworks brawl. I was very excited for that fight. I think Michel Pereira is exciting to watch anytime. If you've never seen any of his fights, he's 4-2, but I mean, the first two fights, he was pretty much doing backflips the whole time instead of striking. So just a wild man. Absolutely amazing guy to watch. Does those Showtime kicks, does everything flashy you could possibly imagine Michel Pereira is doing in the octagon. But what we have seen in the evolution of his game is a lot more patient striking, where you see him he has amazing cardio, especially for the type of movements that he's doing. But with the type of stuff that he was doing, these backflips, literally trying to land strikes on people and jumping off the cage constantly, it was just a matter of time before he was going to gas out. But now that you've seen him evolve and kind of be a little bit more patient, he's shown amazing cardio, crazy explosive striking. I don't even know how he makes welterweight, to be honest with you. The dude is massive. Great in and out movement, closes the distance very quickly, and has great front kicks to the body, actually. I think the only really weakness of his that we've seen so far is that sometimes he can get carried away with putting on a show, and he can't manage his cardio there. But when we have seen him focused and patient, he's been an absolute monster to deal with. Now, in terms of his opponent, Andre Fialho, his UFC debut. What to say about Andre? So, good boxing combinations, big stocky dude. Michel's definitely going to have the height advantage, but in terms of muscle, they're going to be pretty close. I still think Pereira is going to be bigger, but Andre is definitely a big welterweight himself. He's got good cardio, heavy hands, very, very tough. Very tough. Trains out of Henry Hoof's gym, so I'm assuming he's getting better and better as his fights go on and as his career progresses. I mean, this is going to be his first fight in the UFC, so we're going to see what improvements he's made since being on the amateur scene. The only downsides to his game is he doesn't have while he has good boxing combinations, he doesn't have the best head movement. I saw the fight between him and James Vick, and granted, he does end up KOing James Vick, who is a very talented striker, but just has had this issue of leaning his chin up in the air. And recently, once he gets touched with one good shot, it's panic for him. But besides that, when I look at the first part of the fight, James Vick was actually dominating with just long, straight jabs, front kicks to the body, nice side kicks, head kicks. And these are all things Pereira is more than capable of doing, but in a much more powerful manner. And I think he's really going to be able to take advantage of Fialho in the stand-up. And even in the ground as well. I think Fialho, I haven't seen him shoot many takedowns. He's a strong wrestler. I don't see him getting Pereira to the ground either. I think this is going to be an easy victory for Pereira. Either a KO or a decision where he's knocked Andre down a few times. But yeah, not much else to say in regards to that fight, especially with Andre being a late replacement. On to the next fight on the card. A fight I'm very excited for in the flyweight division for the UFC title, Brandon Moreno versus Deiveson Figueiredo. It's the third fight, and Moreno coming off a dominant victory over Deiveson. I'm still very, very excited for this fight. One, because I think Deiveson Figueiredo didn't look like himself in that last fight, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but whether that was the weight cut or he was just having an off night, I think is going to play a big factor into this fight. But let's take a look at like where each of these fighters excel. So we'll start with Brandon Moreno. Very sharp boxing, great combination puncher. You see him put volume attacks together, 4 or 5 punch combinations. He mixes up body to head very well, throws a lot of high kicks, and can do that all night long. I mean, the guy's got amazing cardio. A true Mexican fighter in the UFC, and I think one of the best we've seen so far. What else is good about his game? Great takedowns and great timing on the takedowns. You see consistently in his fights, he doesn't work especially hard for these takedowns. He really lets them come to him in the fight, and it's something that we saw in the Royval fight, in the second Deiveson fight, where he just catches these guys overcommitting and is just able to take their backs. He's got great scrambling ability, and when he gets on top of you, he's got solid control. I mean, he's had a hard time holding down Figueiredo, but I mean, everybody's had a hard time holding him down, so it's nothing to take away from his game. In terms of what else, I mentioned the boxing, but a key part of his game is that jab, man. He has such a crisp jab, such a slick jab, and he really uses it to control the distance. And I think that was a key in the Deiveson fight with him in the second one. And I think he sets up a lot of combinations with it, and he catches people coming in as well a lot with it. So I think those are all very strong parts of Moreno's game, and he's just an absolute dog, man. I mean, this guy has a chin. Like, he was eating shots from Figueiredo in that first fight that were just putting everyone else in the division to sleep. So hats off to him for that. Now, for his opponent, Deiveson Figueiredo, the God of War. This guy, when we've seen him at his best, comes to kill. Absolute savage, crazy power and explosive ability. I mean, when you see some of the strikes he lands, or even in the grappling exchanges, especially early in the fight, he is just the way he explodes is just unbelievable. His scrambling ability is unbelievable. His guillotine is ferocious. That one he locked up on, I believe it was Alex Perez. I mean, just a thing of beauty. And just the explosive ability and athletic ability coming off Deiveson is one thing, but you combine that with his accurate punching, huge punching power, and it's a recipe that's put out almost everybody in the division. Now, in terms of some of his other abilities, he likes to fight with this hands down kind of style, almost keeps the right hand cocked. But what that kind of does is, because his hands are down, it's hard for people sometimes to see the strikes coming. And especially that long stance, he covers distance very quickly. And I think it's something that's made it a hard time for people to see some of the strikes coming, especially that lead hand. I mean, that lead hand, he throws the left hook to the body with it. And his jab is like, I mean, it's like someone throwing a power punch. So it's a huge weapon of his. Explosive kicks, doesn't mix them up or use them to necessarily set up things, but when he unleashes that to the body, it's just a thunderous sound that happens in the arena. So in terms of some of his shortfalls, I think sometimes gets hit a little bit too much in the pocket just because of that hands down style. When he's just unloading in combinations, he can sometimes get clipped there. So I think that's something to look out for. And also, he's just huge for the division. I think the weight cut is brutal, and I think that's something that definitely took away from him in the second fight. I think consistently making flyweight is going to be a really tough test. I anticipate if he loses this fight, he's moving up to bantamweight immediately. But we'll see what happens if he's able to pull out the victory. Now, in terms of who I think is going to win this fight and how they match up. So I think one thing I noticed going back and watching the first fight and the second fight, both of these fighters operate best when they're controlling the center of the octagon. You saw in those early first rounds in the first fight when Moreno was getting teed off on, he was backing up, very wary of Figueiredo's power, and I think that's something that left him open and exposed because his back was against the fence and Figueiredo was just able to tee off on him. And while Moreno has good countering ability, I wouldn't say it's his strongest attribute. I think he really is dominating fights when he's putting volume combinations on people and really backing and pushing the pace forward on them. So I think whoever is controlling the center and whoever's walking the other individual down is going to be who's at the advantage in that moment. And I think it's something very evident when you go back and watch those two fights. You see immediately in the second fight, Moreno's much less respectful of Figueiredo's power, and he starts taking the center immediately and going at him. And I think that's something that really changed the fight, because you saw Deiveson backing up, and his countering ability, while it's great as well, it's not his strong suit, and that's really where Moreno's going to shine. So for them, it's really about who's controlling the center and who's backing who up. I think it's going to be the key tell when you watch the first few rounds. Now, in terms of Moreno, the jab is going to be key. That's how he clipped and actually knocked down Deiveson in the first fight. Caught Deiveson in between a strike with a nice clean jab. The takedowns, capitalizing on those times where Figueiredo overcommits. I mean, the guy throws his entire body into shots, so he will have those opportunities, and Moreno just needs to capitalize again on those opportunities. In terms of Deiveson, I think, like I mentioned, it's for him, he needs to take the center, bully Moreno back against the fence, and unload on him there. I think that's where he's going to do his best work. I know he has to be patient with his cardio, because cardio to cardio, Moreno's going to outlast him every time. But if Figueiredo can back him against the fence, be patient, use feints. Feints are going to be a big thing for him here. Use feints to back him up against the fence and then really start to unload off of him once he has Moreno cornered. I think for both of these fighters, low kicks are going to be very crucial because they both have heavy boxing stances. You see them both lean forward, heavy on that lead leg. So I think low kicks are going to be very effective for both of them. But in terms of my prediction, I think Moreno's going to get another finish here. I think over 5 rounds, Deiveson just can't hang with him. Moreno has so many more options and so many more different ways to win this fight, where I think Figueiredo, if it's not in the first round, first or second round, I think he's going to have a hard time dealing with the volume and the pace the fight is going to be going at. And especially when Moreno starts mixing in those takedowns, it's going to be a long night for Figueiredo. And that brings us to our main event for the heavyweight world championship. I mean, I don't think there's been a better fight in this division for a very long time. Francis Ngannou versus Ciryl Gane. I mean, there's so much to dive into here. Let's start with Francis. What are Francis's strengths? I mean, he carries nuclear bombs in his fists. That's his one superpower, is just a light switch that can put anybody in the UFC out unconscious with one shot. No one can strike with him in the pocket. Anybody who's even remotely engaged with him in the pocket has been put to sleep immediately. I think you saw Stipe, yes, land that pull counter, but it wasn't engaging and trading with him and trying to slip punches. It was him evading and catching Francis overextended. And so I think that's the same thing Francis has to look to make sure he doesn't repeat those mistakes. And we didn't see him at all. Saw maybe 1-2 times, but really was much more polished with that, and it really improved his game in the second Stipe fight. You see him got a little overzealous there when he had Stipe hurt, and Stipe caught him with that pull counter again. But I mean, then Stipe actually overcommitted himself, and Francis just put him out with that left hook. But I think we saw a lot more patient Francis, a lot more thoughtful with his striking, and that was a scary individual that night. And I think anybody else in the division wouldn't even have a chance against that Francis. The Francis that takes his time, doesn't overcommit, sets up his strikes, and waits for the opening to capitalize. And you have a hard time taking him down. I mean, that takedown defense is looking super on point now as well. That anybody else in the division, there's no chance. There's no chance they can compete with that, except for Ciryl Gane. But we'll dive into it as we go on. So let's keep focusing on Francis's strengths. So we've seen the improved patience, improved takedown defense, nuclear weapons in the pocket. Also has a very solid countering ability. You've seen him capitalize anytime people have made mistakes. One thing that you've consistently seen in his fights is people know the power that Francis possesses, and because of that, they don't want to engage with him fully all the time. And that actually has their fear of Francis's power has actually left them open for more shots than it would have if they had approached it with a little bit more level head. I think you saw Stipe in the second fight overcommitted, and that's how he got caught with that left hook. And just in that fight in general, I think Francis was just very patient and showed a very solid countering ability. The Arlovski fight was another one. Arlovski's just trying to whiff at him from so far away because he doesn't want to get any near close. Then coming up short and being overextended, and Francis just, boom, immediately capitalizes. And you saw him also do that in the Junior Dos Santos fight, where Dos Santos does the same thing, tries to wing an overhand right from like very far away, and just comes up short, and Francis puts his lights out. And that's it. So I think those are all of Francis's strengths. Now, in terms of his weaknesses, we've touched on those a little bit, but just to reiterate, he has shown the ability to gas out if he overcommits in fights. And It's something that he's drastically improved on, but efficiency for him is going to be key, especially in this fight. And to not overcommit is going to be huge as well. Now, for his opponent, the undefeated Ciryl Gane. I would say Ciryl is the most advanced striker the heavyweight division's ever seen, which is absolutely insane because I think he doesn't even have this extensive kickboxing record. I believe he's 14 fights in Muay Thai and 14-0 in Muay Thai. I mean, the same way Francis is a freak in power, Ciryl is a freak in fighting IQ. I mean, the guy just is such a natural at it. And the way he talks about it, he was just like, oh yeah, like I enjoyed it a little bit, so I thought I'd try MMA, and now he's the heavyweight champion. I mean, the guy, like, it seemed effortless along the way, and he makes it look effortless in all of these fights. Some other of his strengths, amazing footwork, but I think his biggest strength is really his judgment of distance, his ability to know where he can hit, where he needs to be to hit, and where his opponents can't hit him. I think that in combination with his hand speed and kicking speed, he's got very fast hands and very fast kicks. And I mean, the jab is lightning. The jab is absolutely lightning quick, and he uses that and his low leg kicks to set up all of his other strikes. But a combination of the judge of that distance with the speed is just a nightmare for everyone. I mean, the fight that really opened my eyes up to his ability, I was kind of no-selling Gane along the way. I thought he was very talented, but there was just, I don't know, there was this excitement, I think, that was just missing from a little bit of his fights, and I think part of that was just because he was making it look so effortlessly. But I think now that we saw in the Volkov fight was the real eye-opener for me, because Volkov, as an absolutely massive heavyweight, huge reach, very tall, very, very long legs, and has been able to keep that distance with almost every other one of his fighters, and almost every other one of his fights, and has shown an amazing ability to kind of manage that range himself. So when Ciryl went in there and just made it look so easy, closed the distance, Volkov, when he backed out, Volkov couldn't hit him. When he engaged, he was catching Volkov every time and overwhelming him with that speed. And after that fight, I stopped doubting Ciryl at all, because to win the fight like that, I mean, I could see a lot of people going in, boxing Volkov in the pocket and maybe outstriking him there, but for Ciryl to outstrike him from moving in and out of distance was just amazing to see on a guy that size. So that's definitely one of his biggest strengths. In terms of his weaknesses, I mean, we haven't really seen any. And I think that's the scary part about Ciryl Gane. His coach, Franz Ferdinand, called him a computer, and so far he's looked the part, and he's absolutely looked the part. But I think the one thing that we could possibly see with Ciryl, even though he's shown this amazing evasive ability, my only thought is that he could maybe get cornered into the fence and where someone could tee off on him, but he hasn't even shown that as a vulnerability. So we have no reason to doubt his ability to kind of move around and keep that distance that he operates at so well. Now, in terms of how these guys both match up, Ciryl, I think, is going to be looking to implement the exact same game plan as he did in the Derek Lewis fight. I think for him, that was the perfect blueprint. And Derek Lewis contains that same type of just crazy power, but Lewis really loads up on it a lot more. Not as fast as Francis, and not as good as covering the distance. So, but I think it was a very solid blueprint for how he'd need to beat Francis. And what that kind of looks like is, I think, like a lot of his fights, he'll open up southpaw. So their lead legs are right beside each other, start chopping away at that low kick, like he always does, a few side kicks to really get him into range, and then he'll start switching stances and start popping out that jab. And those two weapons there are what I believe he uses to set up so many other of his strikes. So that low leg kick and that lightning fast jab set up everything else for Ciryl. And he'll pick away. You saw him just pick away at Lewis with those attacks. I mean, also using front kicks as well, but these very long strikes that he can keep his distance with. He'll pick away at those, and he did until Lewis just got frustrated, started overcommitting, and you visibly saw it on his face just get annoyed and just be like, oh, my God, right? And until his leg was just gone, and Ciryl felt comfortable in the range to where he could just close the distance and start teeing off on him. And I think that's what he's going to be aiming to do here as well with Francis. I don't think he's going to try to box Francis by any means. I think he's going to implement the same game plan. I think he's going to open up southpaw, start chopping at that lead leg, and try to get the jab going. I think he's smart enough, especially considering they were brief training partners. From my understanding, it wasn't very much, but he knows, and he's a very intelligent fighter, and he knows he can't engage with Francis, at least until the later rounds. And I think Cyryl's best shot is definitely dragging this out into the championship rounds here, because he's shown amazing cardio as well. Now, for Ngannou, what does Ngannou need to do to win? Ngannou needs to, one, be ready to check a lot of leg kicks, be prepared for the jab. You saw him, Stipe used the jab against Francis a lot, but Francis shut it down, especially in the second fight. Parry to the low kick, I think that would be a great option for him here. If he can get that going, it's going to be harder to land against someone like Gane because he moves in and out so well. But Francis showed a good ability to be prepared for that low kick because it was something Stipe tried to go to as well a lot. So being ready to check kicks is going to be big. And then a lot of use of feints. I think we need to see that patient Francis again, but he can't wait too much, because if he's just waiting for Ciryl to engage, I think unlike Stipe, where Stipe needs to get into those boxing exchanges to really start to pile up the damage or take you down, Ciryl doesn't need to do that. Ciryl can chip away at you from the outside. So Francis can't just wait the same way he did before. He needs to really use intelligent pressure to back Ciryl up. So I think the way to do that will be using a lot of feints to get him against the center line, and then using his kicks that he showed in that second Stipe fight to kind of close the range that Ciryl feels comfortable in moving. And then once he has them behind that center line, use that athletic ability to close the distance quick and land his strikes. But efficiency is key here, not overcommitting. I think it's going to be challenging for him to land on Ciryl right away, but if he can be patient and look for the right opening and pay attention to how Cyryl's evading these shots, if he can use the feints to back him up and keep all those things in mind, I think he can land the shot that he needs, and Francis only needs one. Now, the odds makers, I think, again, they have it right on this one. Ciryl being the favorite. I think Cyryl's style matches up perfectly to beat someone like Francis. But the thing is with this fight is that Francis only needs one. He really only needs one. And if he can avoid getting, especially that lead leg chopped up and just constantly jabbed, I think if he can avoid those two weapons, he has a very solid chance of landing that big shot on Ciryl Gane. And we have not seen what Ciryl looks like hurt. I think one of the things that is interesting about this is everything has come so naturally to Ciryl, and he hasn't faced adversity at all in his entire MMA career. I mean, he's just been putting these guys away or making it look easy over 3 rounds. So if we see him get clipped and have to go through some adversity, it's going to be very interesting to see how he holds up in that scenario. Whereas Francis, we know, has a hell of a chin, and yes, gassed out in that first Stipe fight, but we know he's been to the depths and he's had to rebuild himself from there. So we know he has that kind of character and mental fortitude about him. We don't know that about Ciryl because Cyryl's never been pushed to those limits. So is interesting if Francis can land early to see how the rest of the fight will turn out. I mean, I think it's an uphill battle for Francis, definitely. Like I mentioned, Cyril's style plays really well into Francis's, but Ciryl also has to be perfect for 5 rounds. And so far, he's shown every ability to be perfect for 5 rounds. But I really think if Ngannou can stay measured and he comes out looking like he did in that second Stipe fight, that's a hard guy to beat. And that's the scariest individual in the UFC. I mean, Ciryl might be the most talented in the heavyweight division, but in terms of just fear to put in people, I mean, Francis is just as scary as they come. I would really love Francis to win. I think it would make the division more exciting, and I think honestly, whoever wins this is going to rule over the division for some time. I know Francis doesn't want to stay in the UFC much longer because of contract disputes, but I think if he beats Ciryl here, UFC knows no one else can beat him in that division, and I think they'll be ready to kind of step up that pay scale and give Francis what he wants, and I see him sticking around a little bit longer. But yeah, that's the card, UFC 270. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Like, subscribe, and as always, enjoy the fights.